Hi, welcome to the video. Today I'm going to be discussing arguments made by this guy. The channel is Trinity Radio, so you can check out the video. His name is Braxton, and I will be addressing this video to him. Hi Braxton. Recently he posted a video responding to Rationality Rules' critique of the biblical narrative relating to original sin. Now, I will not be defending Stephen's analogy and comments here, as you did a pretty good job of pointing out the mistakes. That does not mean I reject all of his statements, but you made quite a few arguments that I wanted to respond to. I should start with the biblical narrative of Adam and Eve in Genesis that I wanted to clear up so that I can understand your position. You admonish Stephen for not attacking the views held by scholars, but instead the views of less intellectual Christians in regards to hell or guilt, for example. But what's weird about this is that the views held by scholars is that Adam and Eve is a fictional story, a metaphor, or an attempt to explain the world we see with some kind of origin story, as all cultures have throughout human history. But I find it hard to understand why you would be defending this story so strongly, as if it were true. If indeed it is made up by ignorant humans many centuries ago to give an account for our origins, then Stephen is simply attacking a straw man version of the reality of the Christian worldview. My question is, why are you defending this straw man? If experts are correct that original sin and corruption did not enter the universe by a couple of humans eating from a tree, then surely you must have some other reason that it came into existence. For example, the natural account would simply be evolution, that we are evolved primates like all the other animals. So there was not a time or event that brought sin into the world. It's simply just a part of nature that has always been present. I would posit a guess that you accept evolution, that the world we see of people doing good or bad things is expected behavior. But this makes it very difficult to respond to your position, as it appears your response video is in conflict with this. If you are able to clarify what your actual position is, that would be good. But what I will do is simply give my understanding of the stories in Genesis. So let's look at Genesis. This is the beginning. It has some weird day thing going on here. Clearly not historical or scientific. But here on the sixth day, the character God created man in his own image, male and female. Then down here, what I assume is a recounting of the sixth day. It's not very clear what day this actually is. God formed man of dust from the ground, became a living being with some breath, and they located to Eden. This is apparently a physical garden on Earth somewhere. In the garden, he created the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Now, you mentioned that the reason the tree was put there was due to love. It seems to me that if you love someone and you didn't want bad things to happen to them, or for them to do bad things, then leaving a tree that would make this happen in close proximity would be an error, especially when they do not know the difference between right and wrong at this point. The only thing they know is to be obedient. Your argument that there needs to be a choice to reject that love or disobey also does not make any sense. Love is not about disobeying or obeying someone's orders. The choice to reject the love or the relationship with God still exists if the tree was not there. If we look further down, we can see the actual command by God. From any tree of the garden you may eat freely, but from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat. For in the day that you eat from it, you will surely die. Now, this statement is a lie. The character God in this story is lying to Adam. This is a lie to instill fear in order for getting Adam to obey orders. This is absolutely nothing to do with love. Now, either Adam was innocent as a child, such as Mark Twain had written about, and didn't understand even what death was, or he was more an adult, as you suggest, and did know what death was. Both outcomes point to a God using fear and not love to extract obedient reactions. Now, you can twist this as much as you want in your mind, that it's due to an all-loving God, but this is simply cognitive dissonance and ad hoc reasoning. You say that God is all-loving, but you're reading that into the text. In fact, the first mention of love in the Bible is 20 chapters later, in where the character God is convincing a very devout follower to kill his only son. But thankfully, an angel intervenes because he knew that Abraham was so fearful of God that he was willing to go through with it. There is definitely a pattern of fear and intimidation in this story, but no mention of love from God anywhere. A plain reading of the text does not support your argument, and further reading below will also go against it. So a bit further down, Eve meets the serpent and she tells him what God said, that if you eat or touch the fruit, then she will die. The serpent says that is not true, and that instead your eyes will be opened and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. Notice that the serpent is actually the one here telling the truth, having to explain that the creator that apparently loves them was lying to them the entire time. The serpent is being honest with Eve, and when they have more information about reality, they can make a more informed decision, so they eat from the tree. I mean, who wouldn't eat from the tree? It's a tree that gives you knowledge about things you didn't know before. If God really didn't want them to eat of the tree, he could have made the fruit appear rotten, or simply not put it there. Whoever wrote this story intended this to be a well-set plot device, and made it very unlikely that they would not eat from it. The story would get pretty boring if they hadn't. Adam and Eve would still be sitting in the garden today, just doing the same old mundane things, and humanity would not have been created either. But further down, we can see here God is walking around the garden. He doesn't know where Adam and Eve are, and he doesn't know that they ate of the fruit. They have a conversation, and the crime of eating from a tree is revealed. God here seems to be angry and perhaps intimidated. Eve tells the lie that the serpent deceived her, when it was actually God that did. Then the Lord God points to the serpent and curses him. Classic case of redirection of the blame. The serpent was innocent in all this. He simply told the truth. Then God curses the woman for doing the obvious thing, to eat from a desirable and delightful looking tree that he lied about, and that punishment is also suffered upon all of her offspring. He then curses Adam by making him work the fields until he dies, putting death into the world for the first time. And it's only been maybe 7 or 8 days in. This here is probably the most interesting paragraph in the entire story so far. Behold, the man has become like us, knowing good and evil, and now he might stretch out his hand and take also from the tree of life, and eat and live forever. Now, I'm not too sure, but God seems worried here. What would be so bad about Adam living forever? Would this somehow negate the curse that Adam would die? And why can't God just stop him if he reaches out his hand to take the fruit, or just kill him even if he eats of the fruit? For whatever reason, God doesn't want it and kicks Adam and Eve out of the garden. And to make sure no one re-entered the garden, he placed a four-headed angel with a flaming sword that can see in all directions to guard the tree of life. Well, that's the story of original sin. I can see why the scholars think it is mythical. It is a pretty good opening to an epic fantasy story though, especially for back in the day when this was written. So, to summarize, God in this story lies, makes a pretty bad error of judgment by placing such a desirable tree in close proximity, then blames and punishes an innocent serpent for his mistake, rendering God not a perfectly just character. He then places unnecessary suffering and death into the world when he cursed Adam and Eve, when he simply could have chosen not to do that, by definition making him immoral. If for some reason he had to do some odd justice because the sin of disobeying God is eternal, then he could simply forgive them or not make it a sin in the first place. It is weird that there is this logical balance between all loving and all just. You even admit that, quote, "We are stuck with a little bit of a situation here." It's as if there are rules that God created or were created for him by another God that he can't seem to get himself out of, and that make him act irrationally. Or maybe the God character was created by a human mind with these attributes because they sound good. You did attempt to explain this away, but it's very clear that you're simply coming up with some fallacious ad hoc reasoning, and yet it still doesn't make sense. You say God is maximally just, and yet has a crime and eternal punishment for pretty much anything and everything, to the point where literally no one in human history can avoid it. Every single crime has the same maximum punishment, no matter how severe or minor. That is the opposite of justice. Imagine if the current laws we have today expanded to a full police state, it's a fitting analogy during COVID-19, in which working on a particular day or making carved images of anything gives you the maximum penalty of forever. And yet these aren't severe crimes that impact another person, such as murder or rape. This is apparently a crime against an all-powerful, timeless, spaceless, bodiless mind. I don't see how an all-powerful being has such a severely fragile mind that gets triggered so easily. This is such a warped view of justice that only cognitive dissonance could produce. You keep saying that we can't apply normal human standards to God because he is perfect, or beyond comprehension, or any other excuse you can think of. But the fact is that we can apply those standards, you just don't want to because you're avoiding the outcome. You are adding so much ad hoc assertions into the reading of Genesis that it's like we are not even reading the same book. It is very clear that you have your conclusion and are twisting the story in your mind in any way possible to try to make some sense of it. That will be the end of the Genesis discussion. The other argument that I wanted to address is the claim that if objective morals do not exist, then that invalidates any moral statements made by atheists. The idea that you can ignore the arguments of an opponent because you think they don't have a foundation is an extremely arrogant position and seems to be a tactic to avoid the actual arguments being made. It is an argument that I've been wanting to respond to for some time, since it seems to be a favourite strategy by religious people whenever morality comes up, to shut down the conversation. Similar arguments are made in regards to the foundation of reason as well. that if you have no foundation for reason, then we should discount your reasoning. This style of argument has to be the worst argument I've ever heard, and seems to act as a safe space for religious apologists. Often in your video you said that when atheists make a moral statement, that is simply a preference for one thing over another, and therefore we cannot make that statement since it has no ultimate meaning. What's strange is that this is true for anyone, whether objective morals exist or not. If you said X is moral or immoral, this is simply your preference of choosing one thing over another. Objective morals existing would not change this fact. When you spoke about crucifying a baby, we can all see why this is immoral, and we agree upon that. We are both using the same language and hopefully a similar definition of immoral, which means that you should therefore be able to recognize and acknowledge our statement just as you acknowledge your own. If it was objectively immoral, then this would simply mean that what we believe to be immoral matches the objective reality of that moral, but the statements would still be subjective. The premise of the argument is that if God exists, then objective morals exist, and I do not see how one follows from the other. A God could exist that does not believe in or accept or entail objective morality, meaning that one does not follow from the other. There could be an evil God that has a completely different set of objective morals and has tricked humans into thinking that what we intuit to be moral is completely incorrect. Even under your system, only God would be able to know what the objective morals are. It seems reasonable that there are many things that you consider to be moral, but are actually not by God's standards. There could be many sins that you have long held to be an offense to God, but for which God does not care, and the opposite is true as well. For instance, God could consider praying to be a sin, and you would have no way of knowing this. Once again, if we both make a moral statement that crucifying someone is wrong, these are both subjective statements, but even if it was objectively immoral. This would simply mean that we have both reached a similar conclusion to what the objective standard actually is. Now, we can make the objective statement that crucifying someone causes excruciating pain and suffering and then death. We also know that these things are not things that we would like to experience, given the nature of reality and our experience of pain in our lives. It also appears to be an evolutionary process that generates pain so that we attempt to avoid it. Wherever pain comes from, it is not really our opinion that we feel it. On a macro level, it is a fact that humans and other animals would prefer to live a life without pain and agony, without sickness and disease, without anguish and depression. It is not really the opinion of a deer that it wants to outrun a pack of wolves. The same is true of not wanting to get cancer or to vomit continuously, or to have acid thrown on your face. We don't really have a choice to not want that. It is not an opinion. It is still a preference of the animal to not want that, but it's a preference with little or no choice. It is not the same as liking blue versus green or preferring sunrise over sunset, for example, as many apologists strawman. Leading on from that, the definition I would give for immoral, then, would be a moral agent capable of making moral choices, causing unnecessary suffering on creatures that at least are capable of feeling pain, and this therefore contradicts the basic preferences that these creatures have. You could have a similar definition for non-moral agents, such as earthquakes that cause destruction and death, or the wolves eating the deer, but we would usually just call that bad instead of immoral. Nature has within its physical foundations a tendency for physical beings to avoid certain behaviors and actions, because if they do not do that, either by choice or if they fail to avoid it, they will either suffer pain or likely die off. The ones that survive are the ones that were successful at avoiding those behaviors. Once those creatures that hold such behaviors as norms become social creatures and are intelligent enough to create communities, they are able to codify these norms and practices into laws. Some call these moral laws. And due to the varying circumstances of these communities, we end up with a variety of these moral codes across the planet and throughout history. Some of these codes remain fairly consistent everywhere, but other less obvious dilemmas are difficult to find the correct answer. It is clear that morality has improved substantially over the centuries, and it may only be due to the higher cognitive faculties of modern humans, along with the advancements in philosophy and medical science, that we can even begin to answer them. The fact is, the more we know about reality, the more we are equipped to make better decisions about the outcomes of actions on both individuals and society as a whole. Essentially, the objective nature of reality and experience are the foundation of moral thought. This is the moral framework of reality, and creating a more moral society move towards a world that reduces the suffering that goes against the basic preferences of creatures. If objective morals exist in a way that believers put forth, then it is clear that they cannot know what these true morals are. So if we both make the same moral statement that X is immoral, both of these are subjective in the sense that we came to that conclusion using our experience, moral intuition and foundation, and rational thought. So in the same way that you accuse atheists, you are not able to claim that it is objectively true either, as you have no way of knowing that. You mentioned that we atheists could only claim something to be good or bad within the system that we have created, but that's not true either. The system we are referencing is reality itself, meaning that if your God is in reality, and not just in your head, and he is a moral agent, then we can describe the immoral label based on the actions he takes. If a moral agent creates a universe in which there is unnecessary suffering upon creatures that goes against the basic preferences of those creatures, then that moral agent is immoral. Now, this God character could indeed create a universe that did not involve unnecessary suffering. In fact, it is claimed that he did do just that in the form of heaven. It is strange that the God character created these two opposed worlds, and in his all-loving capacity decided to send his children that he loved infinitely to the one that has suffering instead of the one without. Yet this is what Christian theology teaches, that two lowly humans that didn't even know the difference between good and evil, that ate fruit from a tree, is a sufficient enough crime to inflict such a punishment upon all of humanity. There are no actions possible that any other being could take that could prevent an all-powerful, all-loving, and maximally just being from making the correct decision here. Well, I hope this clears up the moral foundations of Christianity and of reality. If you have any questions, then I'm sure you can find a way to ask them. Thank you for your time.